Welcome to the first episode of Kashmiri Pandit History.
To our viewers in the West, we say hello. To our viewers in the East, we say namaskar. I am your host, Niharika.
Or Myon Nav Nakul. In today's episode, we will be discussing Shah Mir, the first ruler of the Shah Mir dynasty of Kashmir.
Our story begins in the year 1300 in the Kashmir Valley.
As was the fate of many states at the time, the Mongols arrived, and they were hungry. The king of the valley was a man named Suhadeva. Suhadeva was an unpopular ruler who levied high taxes on all Kashmiri citizens, including the Hindu Brahmins, and inefficiently protected Kashmir's permeable borders. Under these circumstances, a Mongol from Turkestan named Zulju found Kashmir ripe for attack. Although this was not the first Mongol attempt to conquer Kashmir, it was certainly one of the most devastating. Zulju's army entered Kashmir through the relatively unguarded Jhelum Valley route. Although Suhadeva tried to placate Zulju by offering him money in exchange for his retreat, Zulju did not yield and continued his onslaught.
In response to this refusal, the frightened king fled to Kishtwar, and Kashmiris were left to face the Mongol invaders on their own. The Kashmiri population was devastated, with the Mongol army burning down homes and buildings and massacring innocent men and women. Ramachandra, who had been the king's commander-in-chief, was one of the few officials who attempted to hold some semblance of authority in the valley. He was able to keep a fort in the district of Lar partially safe and protect the town's inhabitants.
The onslaught continued for 8 long months, ending only when winter hit, and the Mongol invaders realized they lacked the resources they needed to survive.
As the inhabitants of the valley who had fled the violence began to return home, anarchy started to prevail, with local chiefs becoming independent rulers. To make matters worse, a devastating famine hit the valley.
A power vacuum also formed in the valley due to the lack of an organized government. Many started to aspire to be the next ruler, and in 1320, one man who began to gain traction in achieving this was Rinchana.
Rinchana was the son of a Ladakhi chief. After his family was killed by his political adversaries, Rinchana found himself in unfavorable political circumstances at home, forcing him to leave for Kashmir.
He entered Kashmir through the Zojila Pass and reached the village of Gagangir. He settled there with permission from Ramachandra, to whom the pass belonged. Ramachandra employed Rinchana as an administrator. Over time, Rinchana gained power and influence. After the withdrawal of Zulju, he, like many others, including his boss and the former commander-in-chief Ramachandra, began to eye the throne of Kashmir.
To make this aspiration a reality, Rinchana devised a ruse to undermine Ramachandra's influence. He sent his Ladakhi followers in the guise of wool clothing merchants to the Lar fort, where they entered on the pretext of trade with hidden weapons, taking Ramachandra's men by surprise. Rinchana then attacked the fort and killed and defeated Ramachandra, putting the leader's family in prison. Since no one was strong enough to challenge him, Rinchana occupied the throne in 1320.
However, Rinchana was no fool. He realized that because he was an outsider, he needed the goodwill of Kashmiris to continue to ensure stability.
As a result, he befriended the imprisoned son of Ramachandra, Rawanchandra, released him from prison, gave him the title Raina, meaning lord or master, and made him his own commander-in-chief. He also married Ramachandra's daughter, Kodarani.
Although Rinchana was born Buddhist, he yearned for a better understanding of the truth. This spiritual vacuum led him to come into contact with a Sufi saint named Sayyid Shafruddin, better known as Bulbul Shah. Bulbul Shah had traveled to Kashmir from Turkestan and was one of the first Sufi saints to visit the valley. He is said to have converted over 10,000 Kashmiris to Islam.
Rinchana was so impressed by the saint that he too converted to Islam and adopted the name Sadruddin. His brother-in-law, Rawanchandra, Kodarani's brother, also converted. This new royal patronage afforded to Islam gave it some new converts in the valley, and also expectedly concerned some of the Hindu Brahmins living there.
Rinchana also built the first mosque in Kashmir on the banks of the Jhelum River, near his palace. It was destroyed in a fire, but eventually rebuilt.
Kinda like Shakespeare's Globe Theatre?
Yeah, except somehow we never learned about ancient Kashmiri architecture in school.
Sad. Rinchana actually died in 1323 from a surprise attack headed by his own former Prime Minister, Tukka. Ultimately, while Rinchana was often a harsh and strict ruler, his governance rested on a system of law and order. He was a relatively able leader and did try to bring peace to a land which had seen quite a bit of chaos and turmoil.
Rinchana left behind one son, Haidar, under the guardianship of Shah Mir, his trusted counselor. This child's mother, Kotarani, ruled on his behalf.
However, there was a legitimate fear that a state without a sovereign might lapse again into anarchy. Clearly, a woman couldn't be expected to run a country, even though Kotarani had already done so for so many years.
To overcome this blatant gender discrimination, Kotarani recalled Udayanadeva, who was the brother of the former ruler Suhadeva, from Swat, where he had been living since Zulju's invasion. Kotarani married him and granted him the title of king.
However, Udayanadeva served only as a figurehead, and effectively, Kotarani was the real ruler. After he fled during an attempted Turk invasion, Udayanadeva faced even more loss of prestige in the valley because of this cowardly act, and ultimately he led a secluded life with little interest in public affairs.
When Udayanadeva died, Kotarani had two sons, one by Rinchanna under the guardianship of Shah and another by Udayanadeva, who was under the guardianship of a man named Bhatta Bhiksana.
There lies the million-dollar question. Who was to become king? The ambitious Kotarani decided to ignore the claims of both of her sons and assume the reins of the government for herself. Why did she do this? While the queen was a fairly politically ambitious woman herself, another important motivating factor was the man known as Shah.
Shah's ancestry is shrouded in myth. Some claim he descended from the heroes of the Mahabharata, the Pandavas. As that is my namesake, I'm inclined to agree with them.
As much as Nakul might want to think that his namesake is what Shah originated from, a more likely theory was that Shah's family was of Turkish origin. Shah's father was a man named Tahir, and his grandfather was a man named Wakir Shah, who was a very devout Muslim. Since the end of the 11th century, Turkish people like Shah had traveled to Kashmir in search of work. Typically, they were treated with respect by the Hindu kings, who employed them in their armies.
Similarly, in 1313, Shah came to the valley with his tribe in search of employment. Suhadeva, who was then ruling Kashmir, gave him a village near Baramulla as Jagir. No, not the 1984 Bollywood classic, the type of feudal land grant. While it is uncertain what role Shah played during the Mongol invasion and Rinchanna's rise to power, it appears that he must have helped him in his struggle against Ramachandra.
Under Udayanadeva's rule, Shah cooperated with Kotarani in organizing resistance to a Turkish invasion, which considerably increased the prestige and popularity in Kashmir, as he successfully had saved the Kashmiris from a fate they had been subjected to just a few years ago. He also entered into politically motivated matrimonial alliances with important feudal chiefs to consolidate his position. If he couldn't marry a chief's daughter, he played the chiefs against one another.
His growing popularity upset Udayanadeva, who was jealous of the power Shah wielded in his kingdom. Shah, on the other hand, was so confident in his own ability that he managed to ignore Udayanadeva's apprehension.
When Kotarani ascended to the throne, she was alarmed by Shah's ambition and growing power. Consequently, she appointed Bhatta Bhiksana as prime minister to oppose him. She also transferred the capital city from Srinagar to Underkot because of Shah's popularity in Srinagar.
Shah was angered by Kotarani's purposeful exclusion and decided to overthrow her and Bhiksana. He succeeded by means of conspiracy to assassinate Bhiksana.
He then asked Kotarani to marry him and share power, threatening war if she didn't agree.
Kotarani rejected his proposal, for she did not want to marry a person who had worked for her. Being politically ambitious, she also did not want to share power. This meant war.
Shah and his army set out from Srinagar towards Underkot and laid siege to Kotarani's fort. As more and more important chiefs sided with Shah and her own forces started to dwindle, Kotarani decided to surrender and accept his proposal.
Here's where the story gets a little hazy. One story suggests that Shah now ruling under the title Sultan Shamsuddin, married Kotarani, but did not trust her because she had only consented under duress. Since she still possessed some popularity in the valley, the newly crowned king was said to have remained concerned about her and imprisoned her along with her two sons.
However, there's also a slightly more disturbing story. That story goes that instead of marrying Shah Kotarani preferred to stab herself and offer her intestines to the new king.
Yikes.
After Kotarani's death, Shah was the lone ruler of Kashmir.
Hey, what do you call a banana that's alone?
I don't know.
A kela.
Oh god, I hope that's the only joke you have.
Alright, back to the story. Sultan Shamsuddin ruled for 3 years. During his reign, he tried to heal the wounds left by the Mongol invasion and months of misrule. He abolished extra taxes, reduced the severity of some oppressive laws and regulations, and tried to keep the feudal chiefs in check.
He also ushered in a new era called the Kashmir era in the place of the Laukika era that had come before it. This new calendar began with Rinchana's accession to the throne and his subsequent conversion to Islam. The new calendar continued to be used throughout the Sultanate period and ended only when the Mughals took control of the valley.
Ultimately, Shah Mir came to Kashmir in search of power and fortune, and was able to successfully take advantage of the political disorder to not only rise to power, but he also founded a long-lasting political dynasty. Under Shah Mir, the situation in Kashmir was relatively calm for Hindus living in the valley.
However, Shah Mir died in 1342, leaving his kingdom to his two sons, Shamshid and Aluddin Sher. Both ruled in succession after the death of their father.
Shah Mir's enthronement ingrained Islam as a major religion in Kashmir and laid the foundation for a 222-year dynastic rule in the valley. The situation for Hindus varied during this time period depending on who was the current ruler at the time.
Overall, however, royal patronage of Islam added to Kashmir's rich religious past and complexity. There was a slow but steady movement of Muslims and Islamic beliefs into the valley starting from this period, and this resulted in almost all Kashmiris, except for the high-caste Hindu Brahmins, now typically known as Pandits, adopting Islam. This means that life for a Kashmiri Pandit during this time period meant clinging on to your beliefs, despite all of the change that was occurring around you. Shah Mir's rule entrenched Islam as a major religion in Kashmir. All rulers of Kashmir after Shah Mir were Muslim, either Mughals or Afghans, up until the year 1818, when the Sikh kingdom captured the region and ruled until 1846.
Although there were many rulers who held power during the Shah Mir dynasty, two are especially important to Kashmiri Pandit history. One, Sultan Shahabuddin, ruled from 1354 to 1373. He is known for being a very efficient conqueror, leading the Kashmiri army to annex many neighboring lands under the leadership of both Hindu and Muslim commanders. Shahabuddin was also a capable ruler and a fair administrator, promoting religious tolerance and treating the Hindu population charitably. Another important ruler was Sultan Zain al-Abidin. This king was known for reversing previous administration's persecutions of Brahmins and Hindu practices. He was also a great patron of the arts, and a significant amount of Kashmiri painting, literature, and music was produced under his rule.
During the Shah Mir dynasty, a stream of Muslim immigrants from Central Asia and Persia came to the Kashmir Valley. These immigrants included Sufi saints like Bulbul Shah, artisans, and people fleeing from conquest. These early immigrants were influential in shaping the cultural life of Kashmiris, who were mostly Hindu or Buddhist at the time period. This, in conjunction with the royal patronage of Islam, led to some concerned reaction in the Brahmin community during this period of time. Particularly, there was a grave concern for the preservation of the Brahmin identity during this early medieval period. While there was some conflict, assimilation also occurred with the passage of time. For instance, in order to find a place in the new administrative setup, Brahmins adapted themselves to the study of Persian and found work as government translators and administrators. Persian became so popular with some of the Pandits that they often composed hymns and prayers in the Persian language. As time went on, Kashmiri Pandits, as the Brahmins came to be known, once again began to claim a higher position within the social order.
Which brings us to today. During the Sultanate period, the introduction of Islam into the ruling class and the conversion of many Kashmiri Hindus to Islam did create distinct identities between the Kashmiri Pandit and the Kashmiri Muslim communities. Nevertheless, this period was also responsible for developing a unique society in Kashmir that was distinctly Kashmiri, in a way not solely defined by geography. Even though Shah Mir only ruled for a short 3 years, the enduring legacy of his reign is hard to match. Kashmir today is more than just food or a language. It is a sense of cultural history and self-identity that each and every Kashmiri Pandit carries within themselves. The Kashmiri Pandit community was forever changed by the Shah Mir dynasty. For Kashmiri Pandit history,
I'm Niharika.
And Nakul.
Signing off.
Toy bozu son video sabrasan, ashchabar shukra gazar.